welcome back to Cindy's Library. I am Cindy, and today we're doing Tolkien Talk. And this time, I'm doing Tom Bombadil by J.R.R. Tolkien. And the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, I should say. This particular edition is edited by Christina Skull and Wayne G. Hammond, and includes the original and the revised illustrations by Pauline Baines. So, yep, we've got some. Let's see if I can find a good one. Ah, yes. Here is an example of one of her illustrations. So, story behind Tom Bombadil. Oh, Tolkien's aunt, Jane Neves, in the 1960s, she thought a book of some of Tolkien's poetry would be just a wonderful thing. And Aunt Jane was one of Tolkien's favorite aunts. She was in her 80s or 90s by that time, probably. Anyway, he decided to try and oblige her after discussing it with Alan and Unwin. And so he went through his old poems and chose 16 of them, revised most of them, and put them together in a book. And he included an introduction to loosely connect all the poems together. These are poems found in the Shire, end of the Third Age, beginning of the Fourth Age of Middle-earth. Now, they don't necessarily all have originated in the Shire. There are some that says are of Númenórean influence, etc. But in here, Tolkien is sounding exactly like a scholar. He'll attribute certain poems to certain people. For example, the Sea Bell, he says that in the margin on that one is written Frodo's Dream, only it's the Middle English version of that. And my Middle English is not up to snuff for actually speaking anything in it, so I won't bother trying to say that. But anyway, so that is the conceit of this. I believe he wrote a couple poems. I know one for sure that he specifically wrote for this collection. Most of them he had written before and published before. Several of them from The Lord of the Rings. So you will recognize The Man in the Moon Stayed Up Too Late, and The Stone Troll and Oliphant. Well, of course it starts with the poem The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, and the second poem, Bombadil Goes Boating. That is one poem I know he wrote specifically for this collection. So yeah, it's a fun collection. And what Hammond and Skull have done is they have their own introduction in which they discuss a bit of the history of the collection as a whole. And let's see, this part right here are the introductions and prefaces and all of the poems. This part right here. Everything after is commentary. And by commentary, I mean when the poem was written, when different versions were written, when it was published, things along those lines. They talk about unusual words that we might not recognize. They also include earlier versions of the poem of one sort or another, since there are earlier versions of just about all these poems. Yeah, except for something like Bombadil Goes Boating, but even there he has a little snippet of something that might have inspired him. And then at the very end, there are a couple of appendixes, along with a couple more pictures. Tom Bombadil, a prose fragment, and Once Upon a Time, and An Evening in Taborbell. So it doesn't really shed any more light on Tom Bombadil, but it is fun to see a few of Tolkien's further ideas about Tom Bombadil and Goldberry. Oh, in this collection, well, hard to choose a favorite. Hard to choose a favorite indeed. Errantry is fun because, and I am not the right person to read this one. It's supposed to be very fast. It's in a rhyme scheme and pattern that is probably the most complex Tolkien ever wrote in. It's the same rhyme scheme as the Arundel poem, The Lord of the Rings. In fact, the Arundel poem grew out of this poem, Errantry, although obviously it evolved a lot over the years. But I guess I'll just read you the first stanza here for fun. There was a merry passenger, a messenger, a mariner. He built a gilded gondola to wander in, and had in her a load of yellow oranges and porridge for his provender. He perfumed her with marjoram and cardamom and lavender. And it just keeps going on and on and on. The voyages he goes on, the butterfly he falls in love with and captures and then breaks up with, the battles he fights, the treasures he wins. And he never delivers his message, so when he gets back to the beginning, he has to leave again. And so the poem starts again, over and over and over, as long as the audience will let you. But probably my favorite one is probably the Horde. When the moon was new and the sun young, of silver and gold the gods sung, and the green grass they silver spilled, and the white waters they with gold filled, ere the pit was dug or hell yawned, ere dwarf was bred or dragon spawned, there were elves of old and strong spells, the green hills and hollow dells, they sang as they wrought many fair things, in the bright crowns of the elf kings, but their doom fell and their song waned. By iron hewn and by steel chained, greed that sang not, nor with mouth smiled, in dark holes their wealth piled, graven silver and carven gold, over elven home the shadow rolled. There was an old dwarf in a dark cave, to silver and gold his fingers clave, with hammer and tongs and anvil stone, he worked his hands to the hard bone, and coins he made in strings of rings, thought to buy the power of kings, but his eyes grew dim, and his ears dull, and the skin yellow on his old skull. Through his bony claw with a pale sheen, the stony jewels slipped unseen. No feet he heard, though the earth quaked, when the young dragon his thirst slaked, and a stream smoked at his dark door. Flames hissed on the dank floor, and he died alone in the red fire. His bones were ashes in the hot mire. There was an old dragon under gray stone. His red eyes blinked as he lay alone. His joy was dead and his youth spent. He was gnobbled and wrinkled and his limbs bent. The long years to his gold chained, and his heart's furnace to the fire waned. To his belly's slime gems stuck thick, silver and gold he would snuff and lick. He knew the place of the least ring beneath the shadow of his black wing. Of thieves he thought on his hard bed, and dreamed that on their flesh he fed. Their bones crushed and their blood drank, his ears drooped and his breath stank. Mail rings rang, he heard them not, a voice echoed in his deep grot. A young warrior with a bright sword called him forth to defend his horde. His teeth were knives, and his horns and of horn his hide, but iron tore him and his flame died. There was an old king on a high throne, his white beard lay on knees of bone, his mouth savored neither meat nor drink, nor his ears sung. He could only think of his huge chest with carven lid, where pale gems and gold lay hid, and secret treasury in the dark ground. The strong doors were iron bound, the swords of his thanes were dull with rust, his glory fallen, his rule unjust, his halls hollow, his bowers cold. But king he was of elvish gold. He heard not the horns in the mountain pass, he smelt not the blood on the trodden grass, but his halls were burned, his kingdom lost, in a cold pit his bones were tossed. There is an old hoard in a dark rock, forgotten behind doors none can unlock. That grim gate no man can pass. On the mound grows the green grass. Their sheep feed and the larks soar. The wind blows from the seashore. The old hoard the night shall keep, while earth waits and elves sleep. There's one more thing I forgot to mention about the commentary, and that is for each poem it references other parts of the mythology that are similar. Like for the Horde, for the dragon, there are some similarities with Smaug, and so it points to the Hobbit for that. So, very fun collection, fun poems. I'm glad that Tolkien put these together. Oh, and since we are also on the subject of poems, I may as well also show you this. I don't think it's long enough for the full Tolkien talk. Bilbo's Last Song, illustrated by Pauline Baines. And it really is illustrated, color and everything. This is one of the last things I think Tolkien ever produced. The last poem, which is fitting since it's Bilbo's last poem. So if you're interested in more of Tolkien's poetry, Tom Bombadill, The Adventures of Tom Bombadill, that's really the only collection, but there's also Bilbo's Last Song, primarily. There are a few exceptions that we will be getting to, and certainly Christopher Tolkien references a ton of Tolkien's poetry in the history of Middle-earth, as does what's his name, Ratcliffe. Douglas Anderson did the annotated Hobbit, but it was Ratcliffe who did the history of the Hobbit. He is the one who did poems in there as well, I believe. So, yeah, this has been a Tolkien Talk. Thank you for joining me at Cindy's Library. Truly appreciate it. And if you have any comments, love to hear them. If you've read either Bilbo's Last Song or The Adventures of Tom Bombadill, love to hear which of those is your favorite. And until next time, I hope we all stay safe and happy. And as always, happy reading.